David had been living in his new apartment for exactly 3 days when he met her. He was carrying groceries up the stairs, juggling 2 bags and trying not to drop the eggs, when he heard someone clear their throat behind him. Loudly. Very loudly. He turned around to see a woman in her late 50s standing in the hallway with her arms crossed. She had short blonde hair, expensive-looking glasses, and the kind of expression that suggested she'd been waiting for this exact moment to pounce. "Excuse me," she said, her voice dripping with false politeness. "Are you the new tenant in 3B? David set down his groceries and smiled. "Yeah, that's me. Just moved in this week. I'm David." He extended his hand, but she didn't take it. Instead, she looked him up and down like he was something unpleasant she'd found on the bottom of her shoe. "I'm Patricia Morrison. I've lived in 3C for 12 years, and I like to maintain certain standards in this building." She emphasized the word standards as if it carried some deep, important meaning. "I assume you've read the building rules?" David nodded, still trying to be friendly. "Sure did. Quiet hours after 10, no parties, keep common areas clean." "Got it." Patricia's eyes narrowed. "Well, I certainly hope so." The last tenant was completely intolerable. Loud music, strange visitors at all hours. I had to file 17 complaints before management finally evicted him. 17 complaints. David made a mental note of that number. Something about the way she said it, with a hint of pride in her voice, set off a small alarm bell in his head. "I work pretty long hours," David said, picking up his groceries again, "so I doubt you'll even notice I'm here most of the time." "We'll see about that," Patricia said. Then she turned and walked back into her apartment, closing the door with just a bit more force than necessary. David stood in the hallway for a moment, staring at her door. In his line of work, he'd learned to read people quickly, and everything about Patricia Morrison screamed trouble. But he was tired. His arms hurt from carrying groceries, and he really just wanted to put away his food and maybe order a pizza. He could deal with difficult neighbors. How bad could it possibly be? The answer came faster than he expected. That very night, around 9:30, David was watching television at a perfectly reasonable volume when someone started banging on his wall. Not a polite tap. Full-on pounding, like someone was trying to break through the drywall with their fist. He turned down the TV immediately and walked over to the shared wall. "Sorry," he called out. "Is it too loud?" "Yes," came Patricia's muffled shout from the other side. "Some of us have to work in the morning." David looked at his watch. 9:35. Quiet hours didn't start until 10. But fine, whatever. He turned the TV down to barely audible and went back to his couch. 5 minutes later, his phone buzzed. Unknown number. "This is Patricia Morrison from 3C. I found your number in the building directory. Your television is still too loud." David looked at his TV. He could barely hear it himself. "I've turned it down pretty low," he texted back. "I can hardly hear it now. I can hear every word. It's completely unacceptable." He sighed and turned off the TV entirely. Then he put on headphones and watched the rest of his show on his laptop. Problem solved, right? Wrong. Over the next few days, the complaints kept coming. His shower was too loud in the morning. His footsteps were too heavy. His cooking smells were penetrating the walls and making her apartment smell like a cheap restaurant. He walked too loudly in the hallway. He closed his door too hard. He received too many delivery packages. David tried everything. He bought a thick rug for his apartment to muffle his footsteps. He started showering at the gym before work. He only cooked bland foods that barely had any smell. He tiptoed through the hallway like he was sneaking into a house after curfew. Nothing worked. Patricia found something new to complain about every single day. On day 8, he found the first note taped to his door. It was printed on fancy letterhead that said, "From the desk of Patricia Morrison" at the top. "Your arrival and departure times are highly irregular and suspicious. Please provide a copy of your work schedule to the building management so we can verify your employment status." David stared at the note in disbelief. She wanted his work schedule? Who did this woman think she was? He crumpled up the note and threw it away. He wasn't about to explain his job to some nosy neighbor, especially since his job required discretion. David was a detective with the police department, and most of his work involved undercover operations. His odd hours weren't suspicious. They were necessary. But the last thing he could do was announce to the entire building that he was a cop. The notes continued. They appeared every few days, each one more demanding than the last. Patricia wanted to know who his visitors were. She wanted to know what he kept in his storage unit. She wanted to know why he sometimes came home at 3 in the morning. Then she started taking photos. David would leave for work and catch her standing in her doorway with her phone pointed at him. He'd come home from a late shift and see her peeking through her curtains, camera ready. She was documenting his every move like he was some kind of criminal. Other neighbors started approaching him in the elevator and the laundry room. They spoke in hushed voices like they were afraid Patricia might hear them. "Don't worry about her," said Mrs. Chen from 2A. "She's always like this with new tenants. Just ignore her." "She drove out the last 3 people who lived in your apartment," added Robert from 4B. "She's got serious issues, man. But nobody wants to say anything because she threatens to sue everybody." David thanked them for the information and made another mental note. Patricia had a pattern. She targeted new tenants, harassed them until they couldn't take it anymore, and then moved on to the next victim. And apparently, nobody had ever successfully stopped her. By the end of week 2, David's patience was wearing thin. He was working a complicated case that required his full attention, and he didn't need this extra stress in his personal life. But he was also a professional. He believed in following proper procedures and giving people chances to correct their behavior, in not abusing his authority. So he did what any reasonable person would do. He knocked on Patricia's door to try to talk to her like an adult. She opened the door with the chain still attached, peering at him through the crack. "What do you want?" she demanded. "I was hoping we could talk," David said calmly. "I think we got off on the wrong foot and I'd like to try to be good neighbors." "There's nothing to talk about," Patricia said. "You're a disruptive presence in this building, and I'm documenting everything. You'll be evicted soon enough." "Patricia, I haven't done anything wrong. I'm quiet, I follow all the rules, and I'm just trying to live my life." "We'll see what the police have to say about that," she said, and slammed the door in his face. David stood there for a moment, processing what she'd just said. The police. She was threatening to call the police on him. The irony would have been funny if it wasn't so frustrating. He walked back to his apartment and sat down on his couch. This wasn't going to get better on its own. Patricia Morrison was escalating, and based on what the other neighbors had told him, she wasn't going to stop until he either moved out or something, forced her to back down. David pulled out his phone and started taking his own notes, dates, times, and details of every interaction, every complaint, every note, every threatening comment. If this was going to turn into something bigger, he wanted to be prepared. He had no idea just how much bigger it was about to get. It was a Friday evening, 3 weeks after David moved in, when everything went completely off the rails. He'd just finished a 12-hour shift working on a surveillance operation and was looking forward to a quiet weekend. All he wanted was to take a hot shower, order some Chinese food, and maybe sleep for 14 hours straight. He was walking up the stairs to his apartment, keys in hand, when he noticed something odd. There were voices on his floor. Not just regular conversation voices, official voices, the kind of tone people use when they're dealing with something serious. David reached the landing and stopped dead in his tracks. 2 uniformed police officers were standing in the hallway outside his apartment, and right there with them, looking extremely pleased with herself, was Patricia. His heart sank. She'd actually done it. She'd called the cops on him. One of the officers, a younger guy with red hair, noticed David approaching. "Sir, do you live here?" "Yeah," David said, keeping his voice calm and steady. "That's my apartment." 3B, what's going on?" Patricia stepped forward before the officer could answer. "That's him, officers. That's the man I've been telling you about. He's been illegally occupying that apartment for weeks now." The second officer, an older woman with gray streaks in her dark hair, looked at Patricia and then back at David. She seemed tired, like this wasn't her first rodeo with false calls. "Sir, we received a call about a possible squatter in this unit," the female officer said. "The caller claims you don't have permission to be living here. Do you have any identification and proof of residency?" David took a slow breath. Of course he had identification. He had several forms of it, actually, including his police badge, but he kept his undercover work confidential for a reason. If he flashed his badge now, it could compromise active cases. Plus, he wanted to see exactly how far Patricia would take this. "Absolutely," David said. He set down his bag and pulled out his wallet. "Here's my driver's license, and I can get my lease agreement from inside the apartment." The red-haired officer took David's license and examined it. The address on here matches this building. Of course it does, Patricia interrupted, her voice getting shrill. That doesn't prove anything. Anyone can fake an ID. I've been watching him for weeks. He comes and goes at all hours. He has strange visitors. He's clearly involved in illegal activities. The female officer turned to Patricia. Ma'am, we're handling this. Please step back. David unlocked his apartment door and invited the officers inside. His place was neat and clean. Moving boxes were still stacked in one corner, but everything else looked perfectly normal. He went to his desk drawer and pulled out his lease agreement, signed by both him and the property management company. The female officer looked it over carefully. This appears to be legitimate. It's dated 3 weeks ago and it's been properly notarized. It's fake, Patricia insisted from the doorway. She hadn't been invited in, but she was craning her neck to see inside. He probably printed it himself. The building manager would never approve someone like him. Someone like me? David said, unable to keep the edge out of his voice. What exactly does that mean? Patricia's face flushed. You know exactly what I mean. Suspicious behavior, irregular hours, refusing to provide information about your employment. The red-haired officer looked at his partner, and David could see them having a silent conversation. They'd figured it out. This was a false report from a problem caller. They'd probably dealt with Patricia before. Sir, everything appears to be in order here, the female officer said to David. I apologize for the inconvenience. Wait, Patricia said, her voice rising. You're just going to believe him? I've lived in this building for 12 years. I'm a respected member of this community. I'm telling you, he doesn't belong here. Ma'am, the female officer said, turning to face Patricia fully. This gentleman has provided valid identification and a legitimate lease agreement. He has every right to be here. Filing a false police report is a crime. Patricia's face went white, then red, then white again. False report? I'm trying to protect this building. You people are useless. Absolutely useless. We're done here, the female officer said firmly. Mr. She glanced at David's license. Mr. Park, again, we apologize for disturbing you. Ma'am, we're going to need you to return to your apartment now. The officers started walking toward the stairs. Patricia stood in the hallway, trembling with anger. David stayed in his doorway, watching her carefully. He recognized that look. He'd seen it on suspects who were about to do something stupid because their plan hadn't worked. This isn't over, Patricia hissed at him. Not even close. Actually, it is, David said quietly. You filed a false police report, Patricia. Those officers know it, I know it. And if you keep harassing me, there will be consequences. Consequences? Patricia let out a bitter laugh. You don't know who you're dealing with. I have connections. Real connections. I can make your life a living nightmare. You've been trying that for 3 weeks already. Oh, you haven't seen anything yet, she said. Then she stormed into her apartment and slammed the door so hard that David heard something fall and break on the other side. He stood there for a moment, then went back inside and closed his own door. His hands were shaking slightly, not from fear, from pure frustration. He dealt with actual criminals who were more reasonable than this woman. David pulled out his phone and called his landlord. The conversation was brief and disappointing. Yes, the landlord was aware that Patricia made complaints. No, they couldn't really do anything about it unless she violated her lease. No, they couldn't evict her just for being difficult. David should document everything and consider filing a restraining order if it got worse. If it got worse. That was funny. How much worse could it get? He found out the very next morning. David woke up around 8 and opened his door to grab the newspaper from the hallway. Instead of the newspaper, he found 3 large trash bags piled directly in front of his door. They were tied shut, but the smell was unmistakable. Rotting food waste. Kitchen garbage. The bags were leaking. He looked down the hallway. Patricia's door was closed, but he could see her shadow moving behind the peephole. She was watching to see his reaction. David pulled out his phone and took photos of the bags, making sure to capture his apartment number in the frame. Then he carefully moved them aside and went to get cleaning supplies. He wasn't going to give her the satisfaction of losing his temper. That afternoon, when he went down to the parking garage, he found his car had been keyed. A long, deep scratch ran along the driver's side, right through the paint down to the metal. More photos. More documentation. On Sunday, he found a note taped to the building's main entrance. It was printed in large letters. Beware. Dangerous criminal living in Unit 3B. Call police if you see suspicious activity. David took the note down before other residents could see it, but the damage was done. Later that day, Mrs. Chen stopped him in the lobby and asked if everything was okay. Someone had slipped a copy of the note under her door. "Patricia's completely out of control," Mrs. Chen whispered. "She did the same thing to the last tenant. Put up flyers calling him a drug dealer. The poor man had to move out because people started avoiding him in the hallways." "Why hasn't anyone stopped her?" David asked. Mrs. Chen looked uncomfortable. "She threatened to sue the last person who confronted her. Said they were defaming her character. People are afraid of her, David. She has time and money and nothing better to do than make people miserable." That evening, David sat at his kitchen table and spread out all his documentation. Photos, notes, copies of Patricia's threatening letters. He'd been patient. He'd tried to be reasonable, but this had crossed a line. He picked up his phone and called a colleague from work, Detective Lisa Rodriguez. She answered on the second ring. "Lisa, it's David. I need some advice on a personal matter." He explained the situation, leaving nothing out. The harassment, the false police report, the escalating behavior. Lisa listened without interrupting. "David," she said when he finished, "you need to file a formal complaint. Tonight. This woman has already committed multiple crimes. Filing a false police report, harassment, possibly vandalism if you can prove she damaged your car, and those threatening notes could constitute stalking. I was hoping it wouldn't come to that. I know you were, but you've got a neighbor who thinks she's above the law. She's been getting away with this for years because her victims just moved away instead of fighting back. You need to fight back." David knew she was right. He'd been treating Patricia like a problem that would solve itself if he just stayed calm and followed the rules. But Patricia didn't follow rules. She made up her own rules and expected everyone else to obey them. "There's something else," Lisa said. "You should run a background check on her. Official channels. If she's done this before, there might be restraining orders, complaints, maybe even arrests. I'll do it first thing Monday. And David? Watch your back. People like this, when they feel cornered, they escalate. She's already called the cops on you once with a false story. She might do it again. And next time, she might get creative with her lies." After hanging up, David looked around his apartment. This was supposed to be a fresh start, a quiet place where he could relax after difficult workdays. Instead, it had turned into another kind of case. Monday morning couldn't come fast enough. David arrived at the police station at 7, an hour before his shift officially started. He grabbed coffee from the break room and headed straight to his desk. If Patricia Morrison had a history of this behavior, there would be records, and David had access to all of them. He started with the basics: public records, court filings, restraining orders. It took about 15 minutes to find the first one. Patricia Morrison, restraining order filed against her in 2019. The petitioner was a former neighbor named William Torres. According to the documents, Patricia had harassed Torres for 8 months, making false accusations, vandalizing his property, and creating a hostile living environment. The judge had granted a 2-year restraining order. David kept digging. 20 minutes later, he found the second one. Another restraining order from 2021, filed by a woman named Rebecca Lynn. Same pattern: harassment, false accusations, threatening behavior. This restraining order was still technically active, but there was more. David found police reports from 3 different apartment buildings where Patricia had lived. Complaints from neighbors, reports of harassment, even one incident where she'd been arrested for trespassing after she entered a neighbor's apartment without permission. The charges had been dropped when she agreed to move out of the building. Lisa walked by David's desk carrying a stack of files. She glanced at his screen and stopped. "Is that your neighbor?" "Yeah," David said, scrolling through another document. "She's got quite the track record." Lisa leaned over to read the screen. 2 restraining orders? How is she still getting away with this? She moves before anyone can really nail her down. New building, new victims, and most people don't want to deal with the hassle of pressing charges. They just leave. But you're not going to leave. No, David said. I'm not. He printed out all the documents and put them in a folder. This was evidence, proof that Patricia's behavior wasn't just annoying. It was a pattern of criminal harassment that had been going on for years. Around lunchtime, David's phone rang. It was his landlord, Mr. Huang. "David, we need to talk about the situation with Ms. Morrison." I was going to call you today, David said. I've been documenting everything. That's good because she's been calling my office nonstop. She's filed formal complaints claiming you're running some kind of illegal business out of your apartment. She says you have people coming and going at all hours, that you're disturbing other residents, and that she feels unsafe. David felt his jaw tighten. Mr. Huang, none of that is true. I work irregular hours because of my job, but I'm not running any business, and I'm definitely not disturbing anyone except her. I believe you, Mr. Huang said. Mrs. Chen and several other residents have actually called to tell me that Ms. Morrison is the problem, not you. But I'm in a difficult position here. I can't evict her without solid grounds, and harassment between tenants is complicated. What if I told you she has 2 restraining orders on file from previous neighbors? And a history of this exact behavior in at least 3 other buildings. There was silence on the other end of the line. Then Mr. Huang let out a long breath. You have documentation of that? I'm looking at it right now. Email it to me. All of it. If she's violated her lease by harassing other tenants, that's grounds for eviction. But I need everything documented properly. David sent the files immediately. For the first time in weeks, he felt like things might actually move in the right direction. Patricia had been getting away with this for years because her victims didn't have the resources to fight back. But David did. That evening, when David got home, he found his apartment door covered in sticky notes. Dozens of them. Each one had a different accusation written in Patricia's distinctive handwriting: criminal, liar, danger to society, get out, not welcome. Here. David took photos of every single note before carefully removing them. He put them all in a plastic bag and added them to his growing collection of evidence. Then he noticed something else. His doormat was gone. The one that said welcome on it, he found it 10 minutes later in the building's dumpster. Someone had poured bleach all over it, destroying the fabric completely. More photos. More evidence. David went back upstairs and knocked on Patricia's door. He knew she was home. He could hear her television through the door. Patricia, I know you're in there. I need to talk to you. The television volume went up. Patricia, I'm trying to handle this the right way, but you need to stop. This is harassment and it's illegal. Still no response. Just the sound of a game show blaring through the door. David pulled out his phone and sent her a text. This is your last warning. Stop the harassment or I will press charges. 3 dots appeared immediately showing she was typing. Then, prove it. No one will believe you over me, that was it. David had given her every chance. He'd been patient, reasonable, and professional. But Patricia Morrison clearly had no intention of stopping. If anything, she was getting worse. He called Lisa again. I need to file a formal complaint tonight. Come down to the station. I'll help you with the paperwork. 2 hours later, David was sitting in an interview room at the police station, making an official statement. He laid out everything. The timeline, the escalating behavior, the false police report, the property damage, the threats. He provided his documentation, including the background check showing Patricia's history. The officer taking his statement, a veteran cop named Thompson, shook his head as he read through the file. This woman's a piece of work, Thompson said. I've seen cases like this before. Some people get off on controlling their environment and they can't stand anyone who doesn't play along. What happens now? David asked. We'll open an investigation. Based on what you've shown me, there's enough for charges of harassment and filing a false police report. The vandalism is trickier since you don't have direct proof, but the pattern of behavior supports it. We'll send an officer to interview her. She's not going to take that well. Thompson smiled grimly. They never do. But here's the thing. Once there's an official police investigation, she can't claim ignorance anymore. If she continues the harassment after being warned by police, the charges get more serious. David left the station feeling cautiously optimistic. The wheels of justice were turning, even if they turned slowly. But he also knew Patricia. She wasn't going to back down just because the police talked to her. She was going to escalate. He was right. The next morning, David woke up to find his car had been vandalized again. This time all 4 tires were slashed. The damage was extensive enough that the car had to be towed. The cost would run into the hundreds of dollars. But Patricia had made a mistake. The building's parking garage had security cameras. David requested the footage immediately. The video was grainy, but there was no mistaking what it showed. Patricia Morrison at 3 in the morning, walking through the parking garage with a knife in her hand. She looked directly at one of the cameras before approaching David's car. Then she systematically slashed each tire, taking her time, making sure the job was thorough. David took the footage straight to Thompson at the police station. "Got her," Thompson said, watching the video. "That's destruction of property. We can arrest her for this." "When?" "We'll send officers this afternoon. But David, I need to warn you about something. People like Patricia, when they get cornered, they sometimes do desperate things. Be careful. Watch your back." David went home and waited. He kept his door locked and his phone closed. Around 4 in the afternoon, he heard voices in the hallway again. Official voices. He looked through his peephole and saw 2 officers standing at Patricia's door. They knocked. Patricia opened it, took one look at the uniforms, and her face went pale. "Patricia Morrison, we need you to come with us to answer some questions about vandalism and harassment complaints." "I don't know what you're talking about," Patricia said, but her voice was shaking. "Ma'am, we have video footage. You need to come with us now." That's when Patricia lost it. She started screaming that this was all David's fault, that he'd orchestrated everything, that he was trying to frame her. The officers remained calm and professional, but Patricia kept screaming, "He's the criminal, not me. I've been trying to protect this building. Why won't anyone listen to me?" Residents started opening their doors to see what the commotion was about. Mrs. Chen, Robert from 4B, even the couple from 2C who David had never met. They all watched as Patricia was escorted toward the stairs, still screaming about injustice and conspiracies. David stayed in his apartment, watching through the peephole. He felt no satisfaction in seeing Patricia finally face consequences. Just exhaustion. All of this could have been avoided if she'd just left him alone. After the officers left with Patricia, Mr. Huang showed up at the building. He knocked on David's door. "I heard what happened," the landlord said. "I'm starting eviction proceedings immediately, even if the criminal charges don't stick. She's violated her lease in multiple ways. The other tenants have been coming forward with their own complaints. She's terrorized this building for too long." "How long will the eviction take?" 30 days minimum. Maybe longer if she fights it. But she's done here. I promise you that." David thanked him and closed the door. 30 days. Patricia would be back from the police station in a few hours, probably angrier than... The silence lasted exactly 3 days. 3 quiet, peaceful days where David almost started to believe that maybe Patricia had finally learned her lesson. Maybe the arrest had scared her enough to back off. Maybe she'd realized she was only making things worse for herself. He should have known better. It was Tuesday afternoon. David had taken a rare day off to catch up on errands and actually relax for once. He'd slept in, made a decent breakfast, and was planning to do absolutely nothing productive for the rest of the day. He was sitting on his couch reading a book when he heard voices in the hallway. At first, he ignored it. Voices in apartment building hallways were normal. But then he heard Patricia's voice, louder than usual, and the sound of tools, metal on metal. David got up and walked to his door. He looked through the peephole and felt his stomach drop. Patricia was standing in the hallway with a locksmith. They were right outside David's door, and the locksmith had his tools out examining the lock. David opened the door immediately. "What's going on here?" The locksmith, a middle-aged guy with a tool belt, looked relieved to see him. "Hey, are you the tenant here?" "Yeah, I live here." "What are you doing?" Patricia stepped forward holding a piece of paper. "I'm having the locks changed. This apartment is being reclaimed by the building management." "Reclaimed?" David stared at her. "What are you talking about?" She thrust the paper toward him. It was printed on official-looking letterhead that said, "Building Management Notice" at the top. The document claimed that apartment 3B was being repossessed due to lease violations, and that the tenant was required to vacate immediately. David took the paper and read it carefully. It looked convincing at first glance. Professional formatting, legal language, official stamps, but something was off. The signature at the bottom was illegible, and there was no contact information for the management company. "This is fake," David said, looking at Patricia. "You made this yourself." "It's completely legitimate," Patricia snapped. "You've been in violation of your lease since day one. The building management has authorized me to oversee your eviction." The locksmith looked uncomfortable. "Look, lady, when you called you said you were the building manager. But this guy says he lives here. I need to see some actual proof before I change anybody's locks." "I have proof right there," Patricia said, pointing at the fake document. That's all the authorization you need. David pulled out his phone. I'm calling the actual building manager right now. Mr. Huang, can you confirm whether you authorized anyone to change the locks on apartment 3B? He put the phone on speaker. Mr. Huang's voice came through clearly. Absolutely not. What's going on? Your tenant here is trying to illegally evict me, David said, making sure Patricia could hear. She's hired a locksmith and she's carrying a forged eviction notice. There was a pause. Then Mr. Huang's voice came back, angry this time. Put Ms. Morrison on the phone now. Patricia's face had gone white. She took a step back. This is a misunderstanding. Put her on the phone, Mr. Huang repeated. David held out his phone. Patricia refused to take it. Instead, she turned to the locksmith. Just change the lock. I'll pay you double. Lady, I'm not changing anything, the locksmith said, packing up his tools. This is clearly a scam. You're lucky I don't call the cops myself. He walked away quickly, like he couldn't get out of there fast enough. David was still holding his phone. Mr. Huang was saying something, but David wasn't listening anymore. He was watching Patricia, seeing the calculation in her eyes. She was cornered, caught in the act, and she was trying to figure out her next move. Patricia, David said quietly, this is over. You've committed fraud, attempted illegal eviction, and impersonation. That's on top of everything else. You need to stop. Stop? Patricia's voice rose to a shriek. You want me to stop? You've destroyed everything. My reputation, my home, my peace of mind. All I wanted was a quiet building with decent neighbors. But no, you had to move in with your suspicious behavior and your criminal activities. I haven't done anything wrong. Not one thing. Every complaint you've made has been false. Liar. Patricia screamed. She was shaking now, her face red and twisted with rage. You're the liar. You're the criminal, and I'm going to prove it. Other doors were opening now. Neighbors were peeking out to see what the commotion was about. Mrs. Chen, Robert, the young couple from 2C, even old Mr. Patterson from 1A, who usually kept to himself. Everyone needs to know what you really are, Patricia continued, her voice echoing down the hallway. You're dangerous. You're a threat, and I'm going to make sure you're removed from this building one way or another. That's enough, David said. His voice was calm, but there was steel in it now. Go back to your apartment, Patricia. Or what? You'll call the police? Go ahead. I'll tell them you threatened me. I'll tell them you tried to assault me. I'll tell them you're running drugs out of that apartment. They'll believe me. They always believe me. David pulled out his wallet. He'd been trying to avoid this moment, trying to handle everything as a civilian, trying to keep his professional life separate from his personal nightmare, but Patricia had just crossed the line from annoying neighbor to active threat. He flipped open his wallet, showing the badge inside. Actually, Patricia, I am the police. The hallway went completely silent. Patricia stared at the badge like it was a venomous snake. The other neighbors looked shocked. Mrs. Chen actually gasped. I'm Detective David Park with the Seattle Police Department, he continued, his voice steady and official now. I've been documenting your harassment for weeks. I have evidence of multiple crimes, including the vandalism you committed 3 days ago, which we have on video. And now I'm witnessing you attempt fraud and illegal eviction while impersonating a building official. Patricia's mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. You have the right to remain silent, David said, and I strongly suggest you exercise that right and return to your apartment. Right now. For a moment, David thought she might actually attack him. Her hands were clenched into fists, her whole body rigid with fury. But then something in her seemed to break. The fight went out of her eyes, replaced by something else. Fear, maybe. Or the dawning realization of how badly she'd miscalculated. She turned and stumbled back to her apartment, slamming the door behind her. The neighbors in the hallway all started talking at once. You're a cop, Robert said. This whole time? Why didn't you say something earlier? Mrs. Chen asked. We could have told everyone to back off. David held up his hands. I work undercover sometimes. I can't exactly announce my job to everyone I meet. And honestly, I was trying to handle this without using my badge. I wanted to give her every chance to stop on her own. Well, I'm glad you finally showed her, Mr. Patterson said. That woman's been a menace for years. Maybe now she'll finally face some consequences. David excused himself and went back into his apartment. He closed the door and leaned against it, his heart pounding. That had been close, too close. Patricia was completely unhinged, and there was no telling what she might do next. He called Thompson at the station. "We've got a problem." He explained what had just happened. The fake eviction notice, the locksmith, Patricia's threats. Thompson listened without interrupting. "That's attempted fraud and criminal impersonation," Thompson said when David finished. "Combined with everything else, we've got enough to arrest her right now. I can send units to your building within the hour." "Do it," David said. "She's not going to stop. And I think she might be getting dangerous. Sit tight. Officers are on the way." David hung up and walked to his window. He could see Patricia's reflection in the glass of the building across the street. She was standing at her window, staring at his apartment. Just standing there, motionless like a statue. It was deeply unsettling. 45 minutes later, there was a knock at David's door. It was Thompson and 2 uniformed officers. "We're here to arrest Ms. Morrison," Thompson said. "We'll need you to provide a statement about what happened today." David gave his statement while the officers went to Patricia's door. He heard the knock, heard Thompson announce they were police, heard Patricia's door open, then he heard her scream. "No, you can't do this. I haven't done anything wrong. He's the one you should be arresting. He's been harassing me. He's been threatening me." "Ma'am, you need to calm down." Thompson's voice was firm but patient. "We have multiple witnesses to what happened this afternoon, including the locksmith who you attempted to hire. You're under arrest for fraud, criminal impersonation, and harassment. This is illegal. I know my rights. I'm going to sue all of you." David heard the sound of handcuffs clicking. Then Patricia's voice again, but different now. Not angry. Desperate. "Please, you don't understand. I was just trying to protect the building. He's dangerous. Someone needs to stop him. Why won't anyone listen to me?" She was crying now. Real gasping sobs. David felt a pang of something. Not quite sympathy, but something close. This was a woman who'd completely lost touch with reality. She genuinely believed she was the victim here, that everything she'd done was justified. The officers led her down the hallway. She was still crying, still protesting, but more quietly now. Defeated. Mrs. Chen appeared at David's door after they'd gone. "Is it really over?" "I think so," David said. "She'll be formally charged this time, and Mr. Huang is moving faux." The courtroom was smaller than David expected. He'd been in plenty of courtrooms before, but always as the officer presenting evidence, not as the victim. It felt strange sitting on the other side, waiting for the proceedings to begin. Patricia was already there, sitting at the defendant's table with a public defender who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. She'd cleaned herself up. Professional clothes, hair neat, makeup carefully applied. She looked like someone's sweet aunt, not a woman who'd spent weeks terrorizing her neighbor. When Patricia saw David walk in, her whole body stiffened. For a moment, their eyes met across the courtroom. David saw hatred there. Pure, undiluted hatred. Patricia wasn't sorry. She wasn't remorseful. She still believed she was the victim. The judge entered and everyone stood. Judge Anderson was a woman in her 60s with gray hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. She'd seen it all during her years on the bench, and her expression suggested she had very little patience for nonsense. "Your Honor," the prosecutor began, a young woman named Jennifer Walsh. "The state is charging Ms. Patricia Morrison with multiple counts of harassment, filing a false police report, vandalism, fraud, and attempted illegal eviction. We have substantial evidence, including video footage, witness testimony, and documented patterns of behavior spanning several years." Patricia's lawyer stood up. "Your Honor, my client maintains her innocence. She was simply trying to address what she perceived as legitimate safety concerns in her building." Judge Anderson looked at the case file in front of her. She took her time reading, flipping through pages, occasionally making notes. The courtroom was completely silent except for the sound of rustling paper. Finally, she looked up. "Ms. Morrison, you have quite an extensive history. 2 previous restraining orders from different neighbors, multiple police reports from 3 separate apartment buildings. And now you're facing criminal charges. Would you like to explain this pattern of behavior?" Patricia stood up, and David could see her trying to compose herself. When she spoke, her voice was steady but tight with emotion. "Your Honor, I've lived in apartment buildings for 20 years. I believe in maintaining standards, in keeping communities safe and peaceful. Sometimes that means addressing problems that others ignore. In every building where I've lived, there have been tenants who violated rules, who brought in unsavory elements, who made things unsafe for everyone else. And you felt it was your responsibility to address these problems?" the judge asked. "Someone had to," Patricia said. Building managers don't always do their jobs. Police don't always respond quickly enough. So yes, I took matters into my own hands when necessary. By harassing people? By vandalizing property? By filing false police reports? Those are his characterizations, Your Honor. The truth is much different. Judge Anderson turned to David. Detective Park, would you approach the stand? David was sworn in and took his seat. He'd testified hundreds of times, but this felt different, more personal. Jennifer Walsh led him through his testimony. The timeline of events, Patricia's escalating behavior, the false police report, the vandalism, the attempted illegal eviction. David presented his evidence methodically. Photos, text messages, the fake eviction notice, witness statements from other residents. Patricia's lawyer tried to poke holes in David's story during cross-examination. Isn't it true, detective, that you work irregular hours? That you have visitors at all hours? That your lifestyle could be considered disruptive to other residents? I work as a detective, David said calmly. My hours are irregular because that's the nature of police work. I have very few visitors and I've gone out of my way to be quiet and respectful of my neighbors. But Ms. Morrison didn't know you were a police officer, did she? From her perspective, you could have been involved in any number of illegal activities. From a reasonable person's perspective, maybe. But Ms. Morrison didn't just have concerns. She launched a systematic campaign of harassment. She vandalized my property. She filed false reports. She tried to forge legal documents to have me illegally evicted. That goes far beyond expressing legitimate concerns. The lawyer tried a few more approaches, but they all fell flat. The evidence was too strong, the pattern too clear. Then it was time for other witnesses. Mrs. Chen testified about years of Patricia's behavior in the building. Robert talked about how Patricia had tried to get him evicted for having a girlfriend who stayed overnight occasionally. The building manager, Mr. Huang, presented records of dozens of complaints Patricia had filed against various tenants, none of which had ever been substantiated. But the most damaging testimony came from William Torres, one of Patricia's former neighbors who'd gotten a restraining order against her years ago. He'd driven 3 hours to be in court that day. She made my life a living nightmare, Torres said from the stand. Every single day there was something new. Notes on my door, calls to my employer, false reports to the police. She told my neighbors I was a drug dealer. She told my landlord I was running a prostitution ring. None of it was true. Not one single word. But I couldn't prove it. I couldn't stop her. Finally, I got a restraining order and moved out of state just to get away from her. Did Ms. Morrison ever express why she was targeting you? Jennifer Walsh asked. She said I was suspicious, that I didn't fit the building's standards. I'm a software engineer. I work from home. I keep to myself. But somehow, in her mind, that made me a criminal. Judge Anderson had been taking notes throughout the testimony. Now she set down her pen and looked at Patricia. Ms. Morrison, I've heard enough. You've established a clear pattern of behavior across multiple residences and multiple victims. You target individuals who you perceive as not meeting your personal standards, and then you systematically harass them until they leave. This isn't about community safety. This is about control. Patricia stood up. Your Honor, you don't understand. Sit down, Ms. Morrison. The judge's voice was sharp. I understand perfectly. You believe you're entitled to determine who belongs in your community and who doesn't. You believe your judgments are more important than the law. You believe that your discomfort justifies any action, no matter how harmful or illegal. Patricia sat down, her face pale. Judge Anderson continued. I'm finding you guilty on all charges. Given your history and your lack of remorse, I'm sentencing you to 1 year of probation, mandatory counseling for harassment behavior, and community service. You're also ordered to pay restitution to Detective Park for the damages you caused. But, Your Honor, I'm not finished. You're also prohibited from contacting Detective Park or any of the other witnesses who testified today. If you violate probation in any way, you'll serve time in county jail. Do you understand? Patricia nodded, not trusting herself to speak. Furthermore, the judge said, looking at the paperwork in front of her, I'm issuing a formal recommendation that your current landlord proceed with eviction proceedings. You've demonstrated that you're unable to live peacefully in a multi-tenant building. Patricia's lawyer tried to argue, but the judge cut him off. This court is adjourned. David left the courtroom feeling lighter than he had in weeks. It was really over. Patricia would be moving out. She couldn't contact him. And maybe with counseling she'd get the help she clearly needed. Outside the courthouse, several of David's neighbors were waiting for him. Mrs. Chen, Robert, even Mr. Patterson. "Thank you," Mrs. Chen said, giving David a quick hug. "You did what the rest of us were too scared to do." "She needed to face consequences," David said. "She's been getting away with this for too long." Over the next month, David watched as Patricia's apartment was emptied. She'd already moved out, apparently staying with a relative while she looked for a new place. The moving company took away her furniture, her boxes, all evidence that she'd ever lived there. Mr. Huang stopped by David's apartment one evening. "I owe you an apology," he said. "I knew Patricia was difficult, but I didn't realize how bad it had gotten. I should have acted sooner." "You acted when you had evidence," David said. "That's all anyone can do. Still, I'm going to implement new procedures. Better screening, faster response to complaints, more surveillance in common areas. What happened to you shouldn't happen to anyone." After Mr. Huang left, David stood in his apartment and just listened. To the silence, to the peace. To the blessed absence of someone banging on his walls or leaving notes on his door or plotting his downfall. His phone buzzed. Text from Lisa. "Heard about the court case, congratulations. Drinks this weekend to celebrate?" David smiled and typed back, "Absolutely." A new tenant moved into 3C 2 weeks later. A young couple with a baby. David introduced himself on their first day, helped them carry some boxes upstairs, and welcomed them to the building. They seemed nice, normal. Thankfully, blessedly normal. That night, David sat on his couch with a beer and finally felt like he could relax. Really relax. His apartment was his again, his home. Not a battlefield, not a crime scene, just a place where he could live his life in peace. Mrs. Chen had been right. Someone needed to stand up to Patricia, and David had the resources, the training, and the evidence to do it. But it shouldn't have been necessary. People should be able to live in their homes without being terrorized by unhinged neighbors who thought they were above the law. David thought about all of Pi,